is a monologue, is a soul to the universe, wings to the mind, flight to the imagination and charm, and gaiety and life to everything. Plato. Music is a soul, can be heard by the universe. I think music in itself is healing. It's an explosive expression of humanity. It's something we are all touched by no matter what culture we're from. Everyone loves music. Billy Joel. Music is a higher revelation than all wisdom and philosophy. Ludwig van Beethoven.
Wow.
So, thoughts. Initial thoughts.
It's very heavy.
Very, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
I would agree 100%.
And I also think that every young musician, and a young person should see something like that because people are forgetting the Holocaust. They don't believe it.
Mhm.
And that's
And,
horrible.
and I know we're fortunate to have a pretty big center here, and I believe I've talked to some students, and they've said to me that this has been circulating around there, so I'm excited that that is. But some takeaways. Some takeaways from you. What resonated in your heart, in your soul, in your thoughts?
Just how alive she is at 109. I mean, that's
No,
unbelievable.
Uh-huh.
her fingers are still quite nimble.
Yeah.
Uh-huh. Yeah, very much so, huh?
Right?
And her mind is still so good.
Well, I mean, I totally agree with everything she said because I started taking piano lessons 5 years ago. And I'm seeing so much of what she was talking about.
Mhm.
5 years ago?
5 years ago,
Did
yeah.
you? Yeah.
Yep.
In all actuality, so a couple things that I'm thinking. I can not even imagine the Holocaust and being in that kind of situation. I can't even imagine it. And the reason why I'm saying that, especially, I've done quite extensive studies about Alice, and to hear how she was in a different world when she played music
Mm-hmm.
and they performed, especially when it's just a propaganda thing. You know that was the side, you know, the show, the Nazis showed everybody that, oh yeah, we're treating them well, they're performing and they're having a good time, but you can see by the videos they're very gray-faced, you know, obviously they're there not by their will, right? But the fact of the matter is how music did something so powerful to her, was a hope for her to continue on, to a point of some of her wordage said that she was happy to be there because she had those connections to music, even though she didn't have a choice. But she was happy to be there because she had that feeling and what music did for her. That's amazing to me, you know, to think about something like that, where, not saying that, you know, people would choose something like that, but how she was never regretful for doing the performances that she did and going into this other world. All three of them. I mean, all three of them. This is a little older. She did pass away a couple years back, but it's very interesting to kind of see her ability to make music.
Music keeps you young.
Mhm.
It just does.
Very much so.
And that experience probably made music mean a whole lot more to her than it might have otherwise. Like
Well,
you say,
you know-
nobody would ever choose that experience.
Right, exactly.
But in her case,
Right.
she made it be something even more powerful
Correct.
than it.
You can always make music.
She played Chopin by memory.
By memory, isn't that crazy? Yeah.
Well,
And granted, now, how much she played or whatever, I mean, it's still, it was in her soul, it was in her mind, it was in her bones. It was, you know, it's just amazing to me of how she was so connected to the music, and the connection is what I keep thinking about. Connection, the emotionally connected. I mean, you could just see by the way she talked about music, the way she discussed making music, the way she discussed the performances that she had, through all the grief she had in her life.
They performed that a few years ago, the the children's,
Mhm.
I don't know if you were here then, but they.
No, I was not, no.
Okay, yeah, they did a huge performance of the children singing that performance. I think it was 2 or 3 days of music from what she was talking
From what
about.
she was
And the whole
talking
sad thing was you were watching these children, and, you know, after their performance, they were all executed.
Mhm. Yeah, no, it's such a, that's why I said, it's such a disgusting time
Yeah.
in our life,
It's like you say,
in our
you can't
lifetime.
really,
Yeah,
can't
right,
believe it.
I can't believe it, I know, I cannot
know.
imagine
It's hard.
even what that feeling is like, you know, but it's just, it's amazing just to hear her words of encouragement and hope of what she latched onto, you know, as far as that. And, you know, and funny is not the right word, but the fact of how the one said, you know, I played cello and, you know, stupidly I said that, and it's like, oh, you're gonna be saved.
Yeah.
Like, just
Yeah.
because it didn't feel like the instrument itself or playing music was really anything at this point of what's going on, you know. And there's another movie that I will broadcast. I don't know if you saw the Pianist or not. It actually talks a little bit about that. He doesn't end up going into a concentration camp, but he's a concert pianist, and he's hid within the country, and it's a really sad scenario where, I mean, where they hid him, they couldn't get back to him, and he was basically on his own for years, and, you know, trying to just find food was something, and he would, you know, and he eventually gets to the point where he's playing again. So it's just really interesting.
Are there other videos of her that, if we went to that website?
Yeah, if you go to the website, there's a longer, this is the short and kind of free, I shouldn't say that, version of it. But there is a longer version of it. You can actually watch more about her and give you some more information about her. You know, so if you're interested, definitely watch more. There's shorter versions of it too. But it's really interesting to hear her words of wisdom. And the story is where she was living, you know, that's why they say the lady in number 6, she was in apartment 6, and she would just be playing music, and people came up to her. She didn't really have too much family or anything like that, and they just started talking to her, and it was just this story that unlocked. And it's just amazing how you hear about all her life experiences, and such tragic experience, and yet her performances that she got involved with music. So the reason why I'm tying this in is I want to talk a little bit. This is actually part of my dissertation. This was one of the music videos that kind of inspired me into thinking. What I'm looking at, I have a couple things, and we can kind of jump into this, but it's what I call sustained adult community band participation. Obviously, we're talking about community band appreciation here, but the influence and emotions of music making is what I'm after. I'm gonna play for you another piece, a really short piece. This is actually me with the Bellefonte Community Band, 2017, so it's not too far, but I wanna hear your reactions to this piece. This was on Memorial Day, and on Monday at a local museum that we would play in Pennsylvania, and it's on music. So, would love to play it longer, but as you can see here, you can see we're out on, it's not a stage, we're out in the middle of a lawn in front of this mansion. It's called the Bollesberg Mansion, museum inside. And for Memorial Day, which I always talk about that, you know, remembering those who served and, you know, paying tribute to our country, is a day that we get together and we play music. And if you notice, you can see there's a lot in the band, okay? Maybe, not a massive amount, but we at least had around 50, 45, 50-ish that day. And it's interesting because usually it's a holiday, and I always say that, I've been battling this for years. I make this comment that it's a holiday, it's a Memorial Day holiday, and usually it means going away, camping, visiting family, those kind of things. Even though that's really not what the holiday is about. But that's what happens. So I noticed this piece that we're playing, a Southern hymn by Samuel Hazo, and it just resonated and you couldn't see, but there was a large audience walking around us, and it was a kind of piece that everybody talked about afterwards. And who I mean by everybody talked about, I'm talking audience members, and I'm also talking about the performers themselves. And typically, again, what I said before about bands, ceremonial bands would be outside playing loud and proud, and we weren't playing loud and proud. So the reason why I'm asking this is because, and these are, again, there's a lot of pictures from the Bellefonte Community Band who was involved with my research, was I was looking how was participation sustained during voluntary community band music making. And if you see, this is another performance where we actually merged with another community band, and we had close to about 100 on stage. All individuals, all who want to make music, all volunteer, all who are putting their own time in to come out to perform for folks, to make some kind of performance, some kind of thought process for the audience. Was excited to hear what people had to say about the performance. It sparks my interest. I'm looking as I've been focusing this, and I think I've told you this, I looked at research such as the needs of adult learners. For example, these are all adults. Not some of the community members are family members, but for most of the people that participated in my study were adults. And it's interesting to me because the only reason why I'm saying that to you is because we have music in schools, we have these things in schools that are provided, where here's something that has no affiliation with anything, it's just all volunteer, something that people do. And as I know some of you are involved with it, it fills some kind of need. And adult learners, we're talking, usually when we discuss this literature, it's more about what adults need for their education, not music, but just their education. For example, not to be smart, but if you wanted to buy a new computer, if you wanted to get a Mac or a PC, you might not know all the fancy bells and whistles. I don't even know all the fancy bells and whistles anymore. So you might want to take a class on that bell and whistle thing, because maybe you want to create videos, or you want to create whatever. Where if they would sit there and talk about the history of the computer, you probably would not be excited about it anymore, because obviously it's not fitting your needs. Or what I call serving adult learners, how music is serving them. But again, none of these studies are on anything to do with music. It's just research that they're looking out there of how different platforms have served adult learners, or the adult learner perceptions. So I'm looking at the adult education field, and the adult education field is very massive. For example, it's shown a lot of what they call continuing education credits. If you're in the workplace and you need to learn a new skill, you're going to go somewhere to get educated, to get that new skill. But you're not school age anymore. You're not what people call learning anymore, because even though you are learning, but I argue with that. But learning's with school. You learn in school. For example, my mom would always be involved with some kind of form of education when she got out, because software changes. You all know this, all right? So I also looked at my subcategories for my research was what influenced an adult instrumentalist to participate in community bands, So what's the influences? I also looked at how were adult instrumentalists, motivated to make music in volunteer community bands. So the two buzzwords is influences and motivation. Okay. So of course, this is, not to bore you with research, but you formulate, this is the steps you go through research. You do a literature review, you do your research design, so you design your research, then you actually go out into the field and look for your research findings. You formulate your research findings, and then you find your conclusions, implications. And I'm going to talk briefly through all of that so you can see what my big master dissertation was about. So we already talked about community of practice in here, about how the little subsets of the bands, I mean, we were just discussing how the industrial band, the brass off, is an industry band compared to a community band or to a college band, and how different they are and how they're a different community of practice, yet they're still under that big heading of band. And the research that I looked at, and I think I've already commented on with you, was there was some research about police officers and how they used their tools, which is on their belts, their radio, their nightstick, that things, how it was what they talked about. And probably, as you know, the fields that you worked in or the fields that you were involved in, you have this certain vocabulary words that you talk about your thing, whatever that is. If you, I believe, I forget what you did. What did you do?
Medical doctor.
Medical doctor, okay. So you have your own entire words. For me, you probably could throw terms out and I have no idea what you're saying. Yeah, right. You know what I mean? Or I'll even say, I even have music words like, I'll say dynamics and tonality and all this thing, and maybe it makes sense to you, but you might not know what a natural or melodic minor scale and how they're different, where somebody might. But that's kind of the terminology of the community of practices. So what I was looking at is how learning was situated with those tools of music, how they talked about music, how they performed music, and so on and so forth. And I showed you some of these pictures before. As we have done in this class, which is exciting to me, you all know what all this is. We talked about circus bands. We talked about institutional bands. Okay, we're in an institution, and just like I gave my commercial, we're going to have an institutional concert next week. We also talked about industry bands. You watched the movie Brassed Off about industry bands, and you talked about military bands. The reason why I'm saying this is these bands came up in conversation when I was talking about influences and motivations of community band. So I put this in this realm of this graph here, and this graph is just showing, I have circles with industry band, military band, industry band, and it's just kind of meshed together. Because what I mean by that is, for example, the terms that are used in music making could be used in all of these bands, all the music terms. I mean, when I jump on stage with somebody, sometimes I don't even talk to these folks, but we all know how to make music. We can read the notation, we can talk about crescendos, we can talk about the terminology. Just like a band could sit on stage and talk about those kind of things. And if you're ever involved with those things, you have your certain terminologies, your certain tools, your certain rehearsal techniques, your certain instruments that you use are all really essentially the same. However, they can be unique for each group. And what I mean by that is the military band might have different quirks to them. They might have different uniforms. They might have different ways of doing things. They might have different repertoire they play compared to a circus band. For example, they're not going to play possibly Stars and Stripes Forever in a circus band because that's not really a fun, crazy, loud playing performance to show the trapeze artists come out. I mean, they could, but you understand what I'm saying? Or they might not play that Samuel Hazo really slow piece in the circus band, but maybe some of the ideas. So I broke it up in those different sections to think about how it's like this weird web. And this is a two-dimensional, where if you think three-dimensional, it's just this web of terms that are used in the band world. You can even go farther in the music world, and how those things affect everything. And what I'm saying is all the pieces of the pie of what makes a group occur or music making happen. So there is tons of research, for the most part, out there about participation in community bands. Some that I've already talked to you about, such as New Horizon band programs. There's tons of research about that because it's kind of a hot topic to see, as you heard here with Donna, it's a hot topic to see all these individuals kind of involved with something that didn't exist much more than, it's really young. So I think it's like 20, 30 years ago. I don't know the exact date. So there's information about that. But really, to me, that's not a community band. It's a community, don't get me wrong. It is a band, yes, but it's not the community band I was looking, because it's really not a volunteer group. And what I mean by that is you end up essentially pay for it, because I mean you did pay for it, right? I mean you spent a little bit of money for it, and yet it kind of feels like a community band. So it's give or take, it's give or take. Or the social, there's tons of information about social interactions, and what I mean by social interaction is you kind of might know the feeling of an ensemble. When you're in an ensemble together, for some reason you have this, like, I call it the brotherhood or the family atmosphere or whatever word you want to use, you have this connection with other people. And if you've ever been in a group or something, or I know you've been in a music group, you feel that. Or what they call about opportunities to perform. So what I wanted to focus on was a little bit about the deeper connection for music making. So of course I went to the philosophers. I went to the powerful music making at a concentration camp, which is just the movie I just showed you. How there's this positive music making. Or what we call this sensuous, which is Dufresne's kind of ideas of where the senses get this kind of feeling. I mean, you feel something when you hear music. Maybe you don't. I mean, not everybody can feel. I get that. Maybe people are, don't have that feeling. But I feel something when I hear music. When I perform this coming Thursday, I'm gonna feel something. I'm gonna have some sort of sensation. But of course, I'm what I call a music maker, and that, I'm very biased that way. So I also looked at aesthetic experience, and aesthetic experience is that experience where if you have some sort of experience, you have some sort of what I call chills that roll down the back of your head or back of your spine or something. You get some kind of feeling. And there's people, I don't know if you philosophers by the name of Alexander or Dewey, John Dewey, big education guy. So we look for this need for music making, and these are all folks who wrote about literature about this. The Homo aestheticus, which is you're craving this beauty and meaning in music making, or excuse me, how much it becomes part of your human DNA. Where I am a band guy, I will tell you that. I am a band guy. I love to make band music. It's in my bones. When I left and came up here, I left a fabulous community band, which I was heartbroken on. And when I got up here, the first thing I did was found another community band to be involved with. That's just me. It's in my DNA. I can't get it out of there. My wife sometimes shakes her head because she's like, what are you doing? You're making, you make life kind of crazy and busy, but I just keep doing it. It's just what I like to do. It's part of me. Or what a gentleman, actually a music educator by the name of Small, talked about musicking. Okay, it's kind of his fancy word of all parts of music making. So from the productions to the stage setup, believe it or not, to the ticket takers, all of this, when you go to a performance, all the things, the advertising, it's all part of the music making process. And that's how he looked at that. So my design was, I used the Bellefonte Community Band. Believe it or not, they were not anonymous in my research. Usually you do anonymous research because we weren't talking about overly, it was sensitive stuff. I'm not saying it wasn't sensitive, but overly interpersonal things. We actually talked about, we allowed my 22 participants to actually use their own names in their study. If you look at my dissertation and you look at the Bellefonte Community Band, you can actually see the people who are talking about this. What we did was we did interviews. I interviewed all of them. I did an observation of the band and of them in their own, what I call habitat at their home, asking questions as well as in the band itself. And I collected documents, which I will share to you what those documents are, which ended up being a lot of pictures and videos and different things like that. What I looked at is what they call a constructivist grounded theory, which is the big fancy research name. That'll probably bore you to sleep. And basically what it is a lot of people don't like it because they feel like you're coming up with a theory, you're coming up with an idea and an explanation. And in a lot of research, it's really about kind of poking at something and not really saying you have proven something. And what I mean by that is I didn't really come up with a theory other than just some ideas of why this might be happening. You know, what people were talking about, what their connections were with the music making. So what I did was I took some transcripts and you code them. It's a really long process, and I wrote myself like a journal, what they call memoing back and forth, why I was doing my, what I call document or research collection, and was discussing some little ideas and what I'm going to share with you today. And it became more focused and it became more conceptualized, where I could have a little bit of an idea of what these people were talking about. So let's jump into, these are my findings. So I found this, which I've already shared with you as part of this course, was that community of practice, what I call guidance, okay? There was this really compelling idea of how other ensembles have affected these individuals to be in the Bellefonte Community Band, to be in an ensemble. So for example, people talked even about family influence. Family influence was a large part of it. So for example, one of my participants, Brett, he was a trombone player. He had children, he's still working for Penn State, very busy guy. His daughter literally shamed him, as he called it, into playing the trombone again to be in the community band. She ended up being a music teacher, and it was funny. He got shamed. Why don't you be in this community band? You need to be in this. Or a lot of parental influences came by, as far as, you know, a couple of my participants talked about how their father played in the bands, or how they wanted to be like their mom and dad, or how they wanted to be like their uncle, or how it goes on from there, of how that influence of engaging, or what I call modeling, became a big deal. Or a family commitment. For example, one of my participants, John, says, I couldn't rationalize leaving the house without bringing back a paycheck. So that was his thing. He wasn't even in a community band. He didn't play in community bands until he was retired, because he actually had to perform in other groups. He wanted to get paid because he had kids, he had expenses, he had all these other things. So there was this other influence that was going on for him to make music. And he was also a music teacher. And this is a side note I always tell my students, that when you're going to be a music major, or a music major and going to be a music teacher, you're not going to make big bucks. I hate to say that to you. It's a big joke, but it's actually pretty realistic in my eyes. But this self-initiated learning because of these other community practices. Now, I don't want to get you confused. These are community practices that are not banned. So you're part of a family, which is a community of practice. You're part of when you were part of the company you worked for. Those are the things I'm talking about. Now, they talked about band and other community of practices. So they talked about school. They talked how that influenced them, which, if you remember how we discussed that, no music teachers really did that influence in the back. Or how it's always active. It involves your whole self, your whole focus, your whole brain. It was all part of their life. Or how when I play again, since it's good for my brain, it's for my development too. And this picture, a couple of these pictures, these are high school pictures of my participants that they still had. This is a flute player named Paula, and her daughter just loved this picture and always kept it. And this is from when she was in high school. Or this was one of the participants. He went over to England, and he called it the Death Warmed Over, because he was about 3 in the morning, and they were all jet lagged. They came home from a big performance, and this is the picture that was in the newspaper. But they remember these life experiences that were so empowering to them, and I put them under heading of a community of practice. Or, of course, they talked about drum corps, fire bands, military bands, musical pit bands, senior citizens bands, jazz, dance, pickup bands, church bands, community choirs, community orchestra, and professional musicians that were influenced in all of these. So for example, even one of the gentlemen said, by the name of Mike, said the Mark Dunn Company, was named the highest grade trap guns for Sousa grade, after John Philip Sousa. And why that was important to him was he was a trap shooter. And he linked this John Philip Sousa music to this trap gun that he read about, and he was like overly ecstatic about John Philip Sousa's music. And it's funny because it's like his two worlds, his two community of practices collided at that point. Or another one said the fact that you're a part of a very small, tight group. He was talking about a musical pit band that he was in, Brett was in. He was part of this like really small group, and if you've gone to any of the musical or any of the high school musicals, that exists. I mean, you have 5 or 6 players or 8 players, that's it. You're all being multifaceted and playing these performances. Or they talked about other musicians like Alice Forte, Bobby Hackett, Ella Fitzgerald, you probably know all these, James Galloway, Chuck Mangione, Maynard Ferguson, Doc Severinsen, all these other professionals that influenced them. These are their words, not mine, but I took lessons for a number of years. I don't know how many years. That was it, basically. I learned how to read music. I learned how to play the trumpet. We're taking lessons, but we were not allowed to be in bands in high school because we were in the Legion Band. This is funny. None of the Legion Band members were allowed to participate in bands. So how territorial some other ensembles would be. So this Legion Band in actually Bellefonte would not allow their students who were high school age to be in a high school band. I have a thing about that, but that's another story, where they should participate in the school and then also participate in the community group. Or, I mean, there's obviously friendships that you form and that sort of stuff, and we're really pretty cordial with each other. I think that's super important. So it's not like a paid gig where you walk in with 5 other studio musicians and say hello to each other and you sit down and play and then you leave. And Brett's talking about how there's this connection in the ensemble that you're in. And I think you've talked about it before already in the New Horizons band, where these people become your friends. And it's all part of this kind of community of practice. Or this ensemble dedication, where we're willing to go anywhere. It just has to have a community band, because there's other people that are depending on what you're playing, or there's a level of responsibility that you bring as an individual. I don't want to drag down the whole band, down by, playing wrong notes and coming at the wrong time. Or it's, and I found this is in this gentleman's office. This was his trophies. He had these pictures of these trombone musicians playing in his office. And these were his trophies that had nothing to do with community bands, but represented to him some reasons why he was a musician. So why I'm saying this is we're talking about this other literature where it says it's not just about the musical parts, but it's the folks that need to do the music. You've got the librarians, the folks that bring the water, you've got the people who schedule the events, you have the people who do the liaison work, all the grunt work with the stage, and then you've got some pretty good musicians that I feel right now I'm kind of the supporting case. And there's some folks, and without them, it would probably not be as good as an organization. These key folks. You need these folks that are in these groups. And this goes right to the literature that I said was part of Musicking, where you talk about the whole entire ball of wax. Everything you need for the production, as far as, again, ticket taking, as far as stage hands, all of those people. And that's not even the music makers. The camaraderie, the collaboration, the importance of the atmosphere. But I'm too shy to initiate that I'm like, okay, so there's this band, but I'm okay, I will call them. Or that's too much, I can't do that. But then I ran into one of my friends at work, and she happened to say something about going to band practice, and I was like, wait, what? Well, can you take me? She was like totally petrified about being in a band. And she says, because I don't know where to go. So she did. She picked me up. She took me there. She took her to the Bellefonte Community Band, and she has stayed there for many years now. And the funny thing is 2 years later, her friend moved away. But she got involved with this ensemble. She got involved with this community of practice. So as you can see the community of practice side of it. The other side of my research that comes out, which links back to Alice's video, is this. I found people were very passionate about music making. I found, for example, they were desired to play again was kind of always there, just because there's a feeling, that enjoyment that comes in playing that you just don't get any other way. I tried to explain this sensation to Cheryl, which was my participant's Rob's wife. He says, it's just a feeling. There's honestly some songs and some places in specific songs where literally I get chills. Or another gentleman called it like a drug. It's kind of a drug, something you really enjoy, and you want to experience it again and as often as possible. It's like you're a drug addict. You don't quite have the currency to buy the drug or have luck for it to happen, but there's a positive feedback that goes on in your brain, and he thinks it's probably endorphins, which is more scientific side of it. So if you think about that, you crave this, and again, I'm the one, I tell you right now, I get involved with these bands, and I travel. I mean, I just went to a research on community bands that was 6 hours away. Did I have time and money to do it? No, but I went. You do this, and it's just this connection. Or something happens during the music making. Something about the music, it's like magical. It's like I'm not a spiritual person. I'm not a religious person, but there's something that's like transcendent, better than day-to-day human life. There's an emotional dimension to music. At least for humans, it seems as though music really doesn't serve any utilitarian purpose. But these things happen when we hear music, and especially when we produce it. Or for the community service side of things, but with this emotional connection, you can provide people with a good meal, the money they get from scholarships, and the VFW has the essay writing contest. But you can do something, but you can't do something like that. You know, you can take some of our time out of your schedule and you reach a certain level and ability on your instrument, you participate with a group, and you provide an hour and a half of entertainment and joy and pleasure to a group of people. There's this other side of it, this connection. Or this musical expression. Again, these are all my participants' words. John and I could play a tune, we could play a little bit of a melody, we can play a bit of harmony, we find something to play together. I feel him, and he feeled me out. And that expression, self-expression, was just amazing. And I love listening in the trombone section with someone sitting next to me who's playing a different part, and we're playing together. Or this emotional induced reflection, where we never sounded like this before. We've been playing these pieces in the summer, and we just sound so great. And this was from an observation that I saw. Or I never realized how much I enjoyed making music, and I can't believe I let 15 years go by without touching my instrument. Or, well, it's enough that it makes me really happy, but it's not so much that I'm like, oh my gosh, I have the lead part, and I really got to practice. I got to be what they call the Roger, which was more of a professional musician in the group. I had to be like him. So the reason why I'm saying this to you is a lot of this happened from this recital, and I'm going to play it for you a little bit. This is actually from my master's recital, which I also used the same band. This is before my dissertation. And they were talking about this performance. And I'll play this for you. This is just one of the pieces that we did.
We have a special treat for you. We're going to play a popular tune for you. Well, popular back in the early 1900s. Our next piece is called Birds in the Brook. It's a slow, round dance. It's polka-like, and it's programmatic elements. It's in 2/4. It was originally written by Robert Stoltz, which was a popular music composer of the time period. And our arrangement is by a German cellist, actually, Langley Otto, and he was the music editor. What's very interesting about this piece is it became popular for whistlers. Yes, there was an actual school for whistling back in the early 1900s. And if you look at these pictures that I have here, Margaret McKee was a whistler and toured all over the country whistling. She was a pupil of Agnes Woodward in the California School of Artistic Whistling, part of the vaudeville circuit, and she specialized in bird imitations. Unfortunately, we do not have any whistlers. However, we will have bird soloists, and I would like to welcome two people. One person who's on the stage, Danny Isaacs, who's right over here, and also our percussionist, Joe Hauser, who will be helping us with our bird whistling. Please welcome them to the stage.
So they talked about this performance for some reason. It was like such a special thing because it was historically significant. It was weird, and I'm just going to play you a little bit of it. It was about a whistler. It was, Little League people would whistle, but we're doing it with a bird whistle instead. because we don't have like professional whistlers. And if you can see on the stage, this was one of my recital for my master's degree, and you can see how many people are on the stage too, kind of going along with my research. Funny little piece. And really it's just that. Sounds like birds whistling along. And to me, I'm not dissing the piece, but it's so simple and it's so like, if you think about it, it's not, I look at it and is it that intellectual? Not really. It's just kind of this funny little entertaining tune. And they had this like big excitement about it because these two gentlemen who really never really soloed really much in their lives, right, performed, and you get the point, right? So, and there's, it's just really interesting that we're back in the second. The two guys, of course, I had people bring me all these whistles. Try this one, and try that one, and try this one. I mean, just for this part. So very interesting. So the reason I'm saying this is these events are like will happen in their memories. One of my participants talked about, this was more of a high school thing, but this was a piece we were playing in the community band at the time, where he performed it, and he had an article he shared with me that he was working with high school students on the same piece, and it was this connection he had with them. Or, this is a really long thing, I'm going to really read it to you, and I'm going to just pick out the words. Emotionally connected, wanting this feeling, deep connection to music, becoming expressive. That was the words that she used. So, what I found in my research was I found these influences of family, self-initiated learning, ensembles, other community band participation, ensemble dedication, camaraderie, community band invitation. And I found this emotions, these passionate music making, these emotional connections to the music, the musical expressions, the emotional induced reflection of music making. And what that spoke to me was that there's a need for community band invitations to participate. We talked about this already, that it's not that it's a dying breed, even though a lot of groups have folded, but it's this passion between the musician and the amateur, you know, and I talked about this, the professional musician that is, or the instrumentalist perceptions of their abilities, or the importance of music-making experiences that we should be doing in schools or in other communities or colleges, or the motivation to make music. And what that looked at with me is that I feel I need to dig into more of the historical bands, and I have to challenge the mentor and the mentee relationship. You know, music kind of does that whole apprenticeship thing. It's not as much anymore, but it does happen for instrumentalists. Or this diversity between audience participation. So what? In 3 seconds. This research to me illustrated that enlivening environments, there's enlivening environments for learning. It informs adult education because it's the participation can inform understanding of adult learning. You observe instrumentalist motivations and outside of the institutional setting, and these community bands we can look at as a community of practice. And the only reason why I'm saying this is where I go back into the adult ed field of non-music majors. So my thought with this is, and again, it's heartbreaking for me to come up here, and I still talk to all these individuals. They keep trying to lure me back every time. But I've noticed that music making does something for them, and does something for other people too. And it's special. I've only really poked at it. I can't answer the why that people do this, but it shows me that there's something about it that just lives within inside them. You have questions? Or reflections or thoughts about my big spiel? Oh, a lot of words.
sometimes it's a challenge too.
Uh-huh.
You might challenge yourself, or, you know, if people haven't played for a long time,
Sure.
it takes a certain amount of courage to get out in front of an audience and put yourself out there.
Mhm. And I agree.
And it takes you away from maybe your stressful life or something too.
And-
Kind of puts you in a
right.
different world.
And I agree with that. And that goes back to Alice, and then also the recital I showed, I called it, I asked the band if they would do my master's recital, and they were all, sure, we'll do this performance. And then 2 months later, they started freaking out because they're like, this is like serious. Like, we actually have to play professionally. And like, there's gonna be other music teachers watching us and grading you. We can't do this. I mean, there was a total like freak out.
They didn't want to let you down.
Yeah, they didn't want to let me down, and and I'm like, I wouldn't have asked you if I didn't know you could do this. And it became the most memorable experience for them. You know, and we were playing at Penn State. I know the location really doesn't mean much to you, but to them it meant something because they never played in those kind of spaces or for those kind of individuals before.